Greetings once again, friends, live from Retro Central on what's turned out to be a fairly warm afternoon here in Western Massachusetts. My name is Peter, and this is another episode of Consolation. As always, I thank you very much for taking the time to check out my work, and I hope that you'll enjoy it. We're getting away from the summer of PlayStation this week, although we'll return to it next week, because we're talking about something that spans more than just the PlayStation. We're talking about a company that got its big start in arcades and then wound up having a big presence on home consoles as time went on. When you think about arcades, you think about some of the big companies, and let's list them, if you will. You have Namco, of course, very popular. Galaga, Galaxian, Dig Dug, Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man. Unquestionably one of the most well-known arcade game companies of all time. You can look at Capcom and Konami. Capcom with Street Fighter II, Konami with Blades of Steel and with Track and Field. Both companies had their place in arcades and very important. But to me, the company that stands out the most, Midway. Just look. These three discs right here, you have, 20, 40, you have almost 50 games between three discs right here that are attributed to either Midway or its subsidiaries. And almost all of these games are very important in history. I mean, looking at some of the lists here, because I'm not going to be showing them to you on the side, but I mean, Spy Hunter, Defender, Joust, the Mortal Kombat series, which is still popular and running to this day, Wizard of War, Hydro Thunder, San Francisco Rush. I mean, the list just goes on and on of Midway games through the 80s and 90s. The company is very important and to me stands out as my favorite arcade game company of all time. But what I'm going to be focusing on today is Midway in the 1990s, because the 1990s were a pretty special time in video game history. Whereas the 1980s housed the golden age of arcades, where really arcades were the best way to enjoy video games. You could play arcade versions at home, but they were really rudimentary, and you had to make a lot of concessions to be able to get the same kind of experience. This changed as the 80s went on, and especially as consoles like the Nintendo Entertainment System entered the picture, and they narrowed that gap a little bit. But it was still very much an arcade or a coin-op world. But in 1990, and through the 90s, things began to change. Consoles were catching up. More and more people were playing consoles at home, and arcades needed to fight for that entertainment crowd. And Midway, in my opinion, really spearheaded that effort with some of the games that they produced for arcades. Take, for example, 1990's Smash TV. Now, for me, playing Smash TV in arcades, I was awful at it the first couple of times I played it. And in fact, I got so scared to waste my money that I watched other people play. It was almost like a Robotron 2084 situation, where I would watch other people play, beat the game, and just marvel at their skill, but I was bad at it. Enter Super Smash TV for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, published by Acclaim in 1991. This changed things for me, because now I had at least a version of the arcade game to play at home to see if I could get better, if I could improve, if I could learn skills like patience and not giving up when I thought that I was surrounded. And sure enough, by playing this game more and more at home, when I would go to arcades and I would see the coin-op cabinet, I would spend more and more money on that. And believe it or not, I got better. I went from lasting maybe 2 or 3 minutes to being able to get past Mutoid Man on 1/4. So for me, this was the start. But where Midway really took off in the 1990s for me is this guy right here. NBA Jam from 1993. This is the Sega CD version that you see here. I also have the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis versions as well. NBA Jam was huge for me in a lot of ways. It renewed my interest in sports games in general. After just kind of playing them just to have something to play, playing this gave me a bigger appreciation for basketball. It gave me a better appreciation for multiplayer play, especially in arcades. And it increased my interest as a sports fan. having a game with fewer rules that you can just pick up and play rather than learning all of the ins and outs about traveling and three in the key and illegal defense, this had none of that. It was all offense, all defense, rules out the window with the exception of a shot clock, and very accessible. I can't tell you, and I certainly will not admit on camera, how much money between tokens and quarters I spent on NBA Jam from 1993 and beyond. I will say that it was a lot of money and probably could have bought all three versions of the game and then some brand new. That's how much money I spent. Then, of course, when the sequel came out, NBA Jam TE, this is the Genesis version here, that was a no-brainer. I had to play that in arcades, and I had to get the home versions, which I have today. The Genesis version you see here, the Super Nintendo version, and even the PlayStation version, which, tying in with the summer of PlayStation, was one of the 2 launch titles that I bought for the system on September 9th of 1995. The reason for that is trying to get the arcade experience at home, or at least as close to it as you possibly could get. And although the PlayStation version didn't quite get there, it was certainly closer than anything I had played before. The character sprites were larger. Tim Kitzrow's voice, Tim Kitzrow for president, by the way, kids. Tim Kitzrow's voice was very prominent. The music, of course, Red Book audio quality, and the game was just a lot of fun to play. Game has its problems, and I will get to that on a future episode, but suffice it to say, NBA Jam and NBA Jam TE, very important games, and certainly had me coming back to arcades time and time and time and time again. Also a Midway / Williams game that very few people talk about. This is NHL Open Ice 2-on-2 Challenge here. This game is to hockey what NBA Jam is to basketball, and it's a shame if you haven't had a chance to play this because it's a lot of fun to play, especially the coin-op version if you can find it. This is one of the jewels of my collection and a game that I go back to relatively frequently, right next to NBA Jam TE. 2-on-2 Open Ice Challenge, excellent stuff, and another reason to go back to arcades because until the home version came out, the arcade was the only place to play it. Now, if you know Midway history, you know that Midway wound up selling the NBA Jam license and game engine to Acclaim Entertainment, and the two companies kind of parted ways. Midway started doing their own publishing, Acclaim started doing their own stuff. So when Midway decided to go back to arcade basketball, NBA Hang Time was the result of that in 1995, I believe. This is from 1996. This is the Nintendo 64 version here, and by far the best version, home version of the game. This game I have an absolute ton of fun playing, and I can easily pass an hour just playing this alone. Now you'd think because the games are relatively quick to get through that I'd get tired, but I really don't. This game in particular, being able to create your own character, being able to add attribute points to your character, the trivia questions, all of that really combined to make this a great experience. The sad thing about this is I never got a chance to play the coin-op original. This was the first exposure I had to the game. Then we come to football. And I've already talked about NBA Jam and NHL Open Ice, so you know what's coming. These, of course, are the Blitz games. NFL Blitz and NFL Blitz 2000 are the ones that really stand out in the 1990s because these got arcade releases. 2000, of course, being NFL Blitz 99 in arcades. NFL Blitz came out when I was 25 years old. I had a full-time job. I was doing really well at life. I had a girlfriend. I had a lot of other responsibilities, and yet I continued to find time to go to arcades to drop quarters and tokens into NFL Blitz because I was so taken with it. I had always been looking for an arcade football game that would be easy to play. The football games that came out before this were much tougher to understand. The Madden games, while more realistic, also made me struggle a little bit with some of the play control, with some of the passing formations that I really just didn't understand because I wasn't as much a fan yet as I would be in years to come. And this changed all of that because it was so easy to pick up and play, and it was so brutal, the wrestling moves on the field. And again, Kitzrow for president, hearing Tim Kitzrow calling the action and some of his disgust at some of the late hits, just really, really cool stuff. And the idea that Midway had gone from sprites in NBA Jam and NHL Open Ice to full-on polygons with this made a big difference. And then, of course, Blitz 2000. Blitz 2000 for the Dreamcast, by the way, if you still have a Dreamcast, is the best version of the game. And one of the reasons why I'm hoping to add a Dreamcast to my library at some point down the road. And last but not least, when I'm talking about Midway, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Gauntlet Legends game and the series that wound up coming back for consoles. Legends for the PlayStation and Nintendo 64, and then Dark Legacy for the PlayStation 2, GameCube, and Xbox. I was not the biggest Gauntlet fan, to be honest, when the arcade game was popular in the 80s, but this renewed my interest in that as well. I don't know if it's because of the presentation, or because I thought it was just a little bit easier to play, or maybe there were more things to find, but this got a lot of my attention, and moving forward, after getting this game, I wound up getting the other Gauntlet games just to have them. Then, of course, in 2001 and 2002, when Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance came to be, which was really Gauntlet fully imagined, things changed for me for good. Getting both of the Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance games, the Champions of Norath games, Torchlight. I've been a fan of those games ever since, and really they owe a lot of that influence to Gauntlet. So, Midway, a very important company, both in the 1980s and especially in the 1990s, one of my favorite companies in arcades of all time. If you're interested in finding out more about Midway games, you might be in luck. There is a documentary that is being worked on that is going to be pitched soon to try and get funded. And I will link the YouTube channel below. I highly recommend checking it out to find out more information about it. They're going to be having interviews with some of the video game designers and prominent Midway personalities of the 1990s, and it will definitely be a good look. So make sure you stay tuned for that. As always, everybody, I thank you very much for checking out my work here on Consolation. I hope that you enjoyed it. And until the next time, my friends, take care.